Good evening all, and welcome to this April meeting of the City of Playford Council Assessment Panel. As we do have a full gallery with us this evening and some viewers online, I will shortly get to some introductions, but I'll just start by reading our acknowledgement of country. We would like to acknowledge that this land we meet on today is the traditional land of the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. The City of Playford would also like to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. Now, as I said, we do have a full gallery with us this evening, so I'll start with introducing our panel members to you tonight. So just down on the table here, our first two panel members, Councillor Misty Norris and Mr Paul Micken. And then we have one of our deputy independent members, Ms Cherie Gill, who's sitting to my right. And my name is Jeff Parsons, I'm the presiding member. We do have a couple of apologies, which I will get to momentarily. And members of Council's administration, we have a number with us this evening. We have Adam, our assessment manager, Andrew, a consultant planner. We have Matt, our senior manager of the planning section, Sky, who's assisting us with governance and minutes, Abdullah on IT, and Kiralee and Zoe from our governance team. We also have some members of the repurposing assets team, and we have a number of members of our planning team with us here this evening as well. So I say good evening to you all. As a panel, we have a few administrative items we need to move through initially, and then I will get to our first assessment item for consideration. So members, as I said, we have four of us present this evening. We have also received apologies from Mr Aaron Curtis and Mr Nathan Grantham, so we will make sure they are both noted in the minutes. The confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. The last meeting was held on the 21st of March 2024. All members have received a copy of those minutes and have had a chance to review them. Are there any questions in relation to the production of the minutes? In that case, I'm looking for a mover. They be adopted, please. Thank you, Misty. You're moving. Is there a seconder? Seconded, Paul. Thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's carried unanimously. Understand applications withdrawn tonight is nil. Is there any declaration of interest that any member wishes to make? Yes, Misty.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to declare a declaration of interest on agenda item 5.2. So there is a perceived conflict of interest in regards to having spoke publicly previously, and it has come before council as well. So I will remove myself from the chamber.
Thank you. We'll make sure that's noted in the minutes as well. Now, members, this does bring us to our first assessment item for consideration this evening. So this is an application for a telecommunications facility comprising of a 30-metre monopole, antennas, equipment compound and security fencing. The applicant is Wavecon Operations Proprietary Limited, and it's located at 77 Calvin Grove Road in Waterloo Corner. In the rural horticulture zone, performance assessed, given notification, and we do have some representations who have requested to be heard this evening. Now, Andrew, you are the assessing officer for the application. Do you have anything you'd like to take us through as an introduction to the item?
Oh, the one next to it. That'd be right. Thank you. Thank you, presiding member. The information is certainly detailed in the application and the agenda item before you all. We don't have any further information to add to that. That already has been tabled. You have given an indication of what the proposal is before us. It is in a rural horticulture zone. Did go through the public consultation period where we do have a number of representatives. We also have the applicant has been represented by an external consultant as well, which will provide a response accordingly. I'm confident the detail contained within the agenda provides a sufficient summary of my thoughts and recommendations, but happy to take questions throughout the process if need be.
No, thank you. Appreciate that. Now, as I suggested, we had a total of 4 representatives who indicated a desire to be heard, and I understand they're represented this evening by Mr. David Billington, who I can see in the audience. So these rules for making a representation will be familiar to some of you, but as there's a number of people who will be making representations also on the second item, I'll just take the opportunity now to run you through what those rules and guidelines are when you are addressing the panel, just so everyone is clear as to how the process works. So, during a hearing of representations, it is an opportunity for you to address the panel and to speak to your representation and really to highlight any key points that you would like the panel to take into consideration during its decision-making process this evening. Once all representatives have addressed the panel, the applicant is given the opportunity to respond. Both representatives and applicants have 5 minutes within which to address the panel. I do normally keep track of time, and that's just so we can provide procedural fairness to everyone. If you get close to that mark, I'll ask you to begin summing up. There can be some exceptions to that if you're speaking on behalf of a number of people, and if that's the case, I'll get to that at the time. It's important to note that the panel has copies of all the written representations and the applicant's response, together with all the application documentation. We have read all of that information, so as I said, this is really a chance for you to highlight any of the key points. The panel members may have questions of you once you've finished speaking, so when it is your turn to speak, I'll invite you up to the podium here. At the end of your presentation, as I said, I'll just ask if there are any questions. Often the panel does have more questions for the applicant than the representatives. There's no need to read anything into that. It's simply because the applicant has intimate knowledge of the proposal, and we might need to delve down into that in our consideration of the matter. Once you've spoken, there's no further opportunity to address the panel, but you are welcome to stay in the gallery. It's an open meeting. You can view the decision-making process. The panel's role is not one where we need to mediate between the parties to find a compromise. Our role is that we must make a balanced planning judgment based on the information that is before us, and we use the information that you give us as well as the information that's in our agenda to be able to make that balanced judgment. Now, understand matters such as this, where it affects property, can be emotional, but we ask everyone to please be mindful of everyone who's in the audience and respectful in your comments. And finally, making a presentation such as this can be a daunting experience, but there's absolutely no need for it to be. The panel is genuinely interested in what you have to say. So with all of that said, as I mentioned, I understand that the representatives for the first item are represented by Mr. David Billington. So, David, if I can invite you to come forward to the podium, please. Yeah, would you like to speak? Just over here, thank you. Now, as I said, I understand you're also speaking on behalf of 4 representatives, and we have agreed for you to have a period of 20 minutes within which to do that this evening. So I'm happy for you to speak for that time, and we will afford the applicant the same opportunity.
Thank you very much for doing that. Just start with a brief into what appears to be on the screen for your minutes. I represent 4 persons. They are Giuseppe Catanzariti of 108 Calvin Grove Road. You'll find that Mr. Giuseppe Catanzariti did indicate a desire to be heard, and he's on your list. Likewise, Mr. Rocco Catanzariti is on your list and desires to be heard. I don't represent Mr. Peter West, and I don't represent Mr. Joseph Vozzo. I do represent Mr. Pasquale Catanzariti, who's indicated in the agenda report, is omitted from the agenda report, but you'll find his representation is in the agenda item, and he's indicated a desire to be heard. His property interest is 84 Calvin Grove Road. Now, I've also appearing for Mr. Saverio Catanzariti. He is attempting to make a late change to his indication that he didn't wish to be heard, and he does now wish to be heard. All that said, I'm not going to be more than 15 minutes. Thank you. Is it possible to get up an image either from SAPA or from the council's aerial mapping, which shows the property street addresses around the subject land. I just wanted to indicate for the panel's benefit where the two closest properties were. If that's not possible to do, then can I give your members a visual picture? Mr. Pasquale Catanzaretti is the closest at number 84 Calvin Grove Road. He is opposite the eastern portion of the caravan sales yard where this development will go, and diagonally from his front yard you'll find across the road the proposed telecommunications site. And number 71 is Mr. Rocco Catanzaretti. That's the two-storey dwelling to the south, and he will obtain good views from his front balcony of both the entirety of the monopole and the head frame, and also the equipment compound. From his backyard, of course, oh, thank you, that's marvellous, good. So, so my directions were slightly out. Number 71 is to the southeast. Oh, thank you. Marvellous, even better. Excellent. So here, 71, Mr. Rocco Catanzaretti, and here, 84, Mr. Pasquale Catanzaretti, and the site for the development is just there on the edge of the road. Panel members, this development should be refused for two reasons, and I'll deal with each in turn. The first are the amenity impacts at ground level, and the second is that the developer has failed to demonstrate need. They failed to demonstrate this at the facility level, and they failed to demonstrate an absence of co-location opportunities. And further, the granting of speculative approvals, which is what the developer seeks in this case, is directly contrary to the non-proliferation objectives that one finds in the code. Let me deal with amenity first. I accept, of course, that locality is important for the assessment of amenity. And having been out there, it strikes me that this is an area which is not typical of a rural horticultural zone, but it is far more typical of a sort of mixed rural living / farming type area, perhaps as one might find on the edge of a rural township, or as we have here in Waterloo Corner, a mix of dwellings on relatively generous allotments together with some farmland interspersed. There are, of course, some negatives in this area, and I want to confront them head on. The first is the highway, which produces noise. That noise is not going to be affected one way or the other by the telecommunications tower. And the second, of course, is what is an obvious blight on the landscape, and that's the proposed site of the development, the caravan sales yard cum junkyard. Those two things do reduce the amenity of the locality, but on the flip side, it's otherwise a pleasant environment and a mostly residential environment. I'm not saying exclusively, but mostly. And in those circumstances, I'd invite the panel not to accept the justification given by the reporting officer that the amenity of this area is so compromised that one won't notice the additional adverse effects of putting an unscreened compound with no setback from the road on a corner intersection where it is visible by people passing by and from the two properties that I've identified. The most relevant provision in relation to amenity, panel members, is performance outcome 6.3 of the infrastructure and related provisions. Can I take you to that, panel members, because it's important to grasp its full import, and it's rather skirted over in the staff report. I'm not criticising the report writer. Performance outcome 6.3 provides that telecommunication facilities, particularly towers and monopoles, are located and sized to mitigate visual impacts by the following methods. A is inapplicable, and so it's all of B, C and D. B is using existing buildings to obscure or interrupt views of a facility from nearby public roads, etc. There is an obvious existing building on this site. It is the central building at number 77 Calvin Grove Road. That is an obvious screen for the equipment shelter in the base of the monopole. Wherever this pole goes, it ought to be behind that building and screened from the neighbouring residents and Calvin Grove Road itself. That's an obvious and fatal flaw in this proposal. The second is that the facility as a whole should use materials and finishes that complement the environment. Now, the environment is not, with respect, the caravan sales yard. The environment is the totality of the nearby locality, and on the whole, those materials are not chain link fences. They are landscaped semi-rural areas which involve trees, grasses and various other bits of landscaping. There seems to be a predominance of palm trees in this little pocket. So to provide an equipment compound with no landscaping hard up against the road is another fatal part of this proposal. And paragraph D says that one should explicitly, it says this, screening using landscaping and vegetation, particularly for equipment, shelters and huts. There's no explanation and no justification as to why this is not being proposed in the present case. So if I can call these amenity grounds the micro-siting and screening aspects of the proposal, it fails both of those aspects. These desires for minimisation of visual amenity impact is reinforced also by performance outcome 2.1 of the infrastructure section, which I won't read from apart from paragraph F, incorporating landscaping or landscape mounding around the perimeter of a site to screen it. And then performance outcome 2.2, pumping stations, battery storage facilities, maintenance sheds and other ancillary structures incorporate vegetation buffers to reduce adverse visual impacts on adjacent land. And adjacent land is, of course, as the panel knows, defined to include those within 60 metres and across a road. That's not happening here. It ought to happen. There's no justification for it not to happen. These desires are further reinforced by the design module performance outcomes 1.4, 1.5 and 8, I think that's 8.3 subparagraph D. Let me make sure I've got that right. No, sorry, 3.1, my apologies, 3.1 paragraph D. Soft landscaping and tree planting is incorporated to enhance the appearance of land and streetscapes. We've got none of that here in an area on a development site that so desperately needs landscaping as part of this development. And these things are reflected at the zone level as well. I accept they're not directly applicable to the proposal, but if the panel was to look at zone performance outcome 11.1 and 14.1, you'll see similar desires there. Panel members will have probably seen various electricity substations and pumping stations for reservoirs and so forth, all of which are now nicely screened and appropriately dealt with as a matter of public realm impact. Then can I turn to need? The code dictates a consideration of need for the facility by reason of infrastructure and renewable energy facilities desired outcome 1. And it does that by reason of the reference to efficient provision of infrastructure networks that manage adverse visual impacts upon natural and rural landscapes and residential amenity. It is not efficient, orderly or economic to grant consents for speculative development, and I'll come back to what I mean by that. And if the desired outcome wasn't enough, performance outcome 6.1 states that the proliferation of telecommunications facilities in the forms of towers and monopoles, exactly what we have here, in any one locality is managed and where technically feasible by co-locating to mitigate impacts. Now there's a suggestion, and it's no higher than a suggestion, that one can't co-locate with other facilities. I'll come to why that's not right. But the desire for an absence of proliferation means that the justification which has been put forward by the developer in this case cannot be accepted by the panel. If the panel has pages 20 and 21 of the agenda report convenient to them, you'll see that what the developer proposes is that a facility to cater for a projected future need. So not a current need, a projected future need by carriers in this area. And there's no explication of how any carriers are supportive of this. For the panel's background, I'm sure Mr. Barter can explain this in greater detail, but Wavecon is a network infrastructure developer. It's grown out of the divestment of Vodafone and TPG's physical infrastructure, and what the name of the Wavecon's game in this case is to speculatively obtain approvals and then go shopping them to carriers to see if they'll get on board. So that is not the need that the code anticipates. And at the top of page 20, Mr. Bardet says as much, that Wavecon will not be building this speculatively. But the problem with not building something is that you can get all the approvals in the world to plug every hole on every coverage map on this argument. And then what happens when a carrier comes along and says, well, actually, I don't want Wavecon's facility, I want to build my facility, and this is where I need it. I, the carrier, need it there. And the panel says, well, nothing else has been built there, there won't be a proliferation. And so the carrier gets their consent. And then Wavecon says, well, actually, I've got another carrier, so we're going to build both poles. The argument simply does not fly unless you have a carrier that says, I need this facility here for these reasons. Can I then turn to what I'll suggest is a highly cherry-picked graphic from the developer? Because if you've got page 60 of the agenda report, members, you'll see that what the developer has shown you is the current 4G service, not identifying from which carrier, so we don't know, in the area at 1800 megahertz. Now, the 4G and 5G bands span from 600 megahertz through to 2600 megahertz, and we may be getting some ultra-wideband stuff in the future, but this is one particular carrier frequency, and at minus 90 decibel, I don't know what the M is, which is generally a level suitable to achieve indoor coverage. Now, what's the area that's being shown? It's farmland. It's not for indoor coverage. This is a proposal to put a tower over an area that serves a very small number of residents, a highway. And if one looks at the public coverage maps, which provide with respect not a cherry-picked analysis of one frequency at one attenuation level for one particular type of service, then what you will see with respect, panel members, I hope this has been distributed. You should all have a series of plans like that. Thank you. If we start with the last one, with Vodafone, you'll see a complete sea of 5G. So Vodafone's not going to need this tower. If you have a look at Telstra, you'll see a complete sea of 4G. Telstra's not going to need the tower for 4G. And if you have a look at the Telstra 5G, you'll see that there is a little patch in this area which isn't served. And guess what? That's the patch that doesn't have people in it. There's no current need for this facility. And what's more, as I was out there this afternoon, looking around the site, standing adjacent where this development will be, how many bars of 5G did I have on my phone? 2 bars. So there's definitely Telstra 5G, even though the coverage map says that there isn't. And then if we have a look at Optus, again, a sea of 4G, don't need it for that. And then if you have a look at their 5G map, this is fascinating. Outdoor 5G is available. Indoor 5G is heavily limited by where Optus chooses to place its facilities. And you'll see that they're the dark blue patches, which are essentially radial. And some of them are not entirely radial because that tells you where they've put the antennas on the head frames of the facilities. And why, when you've got a facility, do you not make it entirely radial? Because it costs more and you only want to serve a population that exists there. And this site is clearly not where Optus is going to spend its dollars to put a facility, because no one, apart from my clients and their neighbours, is living there. That's not an economic use case. It's a highway and farmland and a few residences. So in short, what you have, panel members, is a speculative proposal based on cherry-picked data, the need for which has not been established, the inability to use existing facilities has not been confirmed by any carrier, hard up against the road, with no landscaping. With respect, it fails every important part of the planning and design code that applies to it. Members, those are my submissions to you. I'm very happy to take any questions, but I note the time. I don't want to exceed my welcome.
No, thank you, David. You made your points very well. Members, do you have any questions you would like to ask? No questions? In that case, thank you very much, David. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Presiding Member.
Now, just given the opening remarks that David made, and I apologise if I have the incorrect information around who you represented, I might just check whether Peter West is with us in the audience and whether Peter intended to make a separate submission.
Yeah, I'm here, but no, after listening to that, there's no further need for me to add anything.
Okay, no, thank you, Mr. West. And also, Mr. Joseph Vozzo, whether you're in the audience. Did you wish to make a presentation, Mr. Vozzo? Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Vozzo.
Hi all, my name's Joe Voss. I live at 21 Stanley Road, Waterloo Corner. I'd like to say that there's a place probably half k from where they want to put this thing up. Just barren land, there's nice beautiful concrete patch on it with nothing around there for ages. So I believe it's government land as well. That's probably the place to put the tower, not where you say you want to put it. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Mr. Vozzo. Just before you go, panel members, do you have any questions? No, in that case, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, at the risk of opening this up, because that's not the appropriate way to proceed, my information was that was all of the representatives who had indicated a desire to be heard in respect to this item. Is there any other person in the audience who believes they submitted a representation on this item and has indicated a desire to be heard? Okay, thank you. In that case, we are now at the point where the applicant will be invited to respond. Do I have Mr. Mark Bade in the audience? Yes. Would you like to come forward, please? Now, as I mentioned before, Mark, I'm happy to give you a slightly longer period of time to respond if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Presiding Member. Good evening, members of the panel. My name is Mark Bade. I'm a planning consultant acting for Wavecon Operations in this matter. There's an extensive amount of information that's already been provided as part of the application in response to submissions, including a second response because it turned out that there was another submission that had a petition attached to it which wasn't provided by the portal. So that was responded to on the 5th of April. So there are two responses to submissions. There's obviously the planning statement as well. You've got, as the planning officer has already indicated, a lot of information in front of you. So I suppose all I really need to do is respond to the issues that have been raised by Mr. Billington and the other representative. Unfortunately, this is not an area that is straightforward in terms of understanding need and what that means for the carriers. The other thing that has changed in recent years is the carriers no longer build their own infrastructure. Previously, the panel and council for many years, for decades, would have received applications from Telstra and Optus and Vodafone in their own rights. They would pursue their own facilities and they would have those approved and build them. Sometimes the other carriers would co-locate on those facilities. the carriers have all now divested all of their infrastructure, their poles, their towers, in some cases their rooftop sites, and their job is to run the network and build new facilities where they're needed. The tower codes, as they're called, of which Wavecon is one, the other two are known as Amplitel, which handles virtually all of Telstra's assets, and Indara, which handles most of Optus's. This is the way. This is the way of the future in terms of this is the way that the industry is now structured, for better or for worse. And as council and the panel will see, in probably has already seen and certainly will see in the future, applications will be coming from Wavecon and Indara and Amplitel. They won't be coming from Telstra, Optus and Vodafone. The issue of need is a vexed one because these facilities are often difficult to locate, they're sometimes controversial, and need can take a long time to satisfy. And Wavecon's approach is to use an algorithm that they have developed using all existing infrastructure that exists all around Australia, mapping all of that, mapping population densities, where new development areas are occurring, where there are poor areas of coverage, etc., and targeting those areas for potential new facilities, which are usually new structures. That's exactly what's occurred here, and I disagree respectfully with Mr. Billington that the need does need to be immediate. It does not. The code anticipates the communication needs of a community being met, and the way that they can most be efficiently met is through the proper and effective planning of this type of infrastructure, because it is difficult to locate. It does take a long time to roll out. I would like to spend just a little bit of time on the maps that Mr. Billington took you to, and I reject the idea that there has been cherry picking of any data. As with any sort of mapping, any sort of information like this, the underlying basis of the map is really important to understand. As you'd probably appreciate, public websites, and certainly the Vodafone TPG one, they tend to be, I think, more generous in terms of what the outcomes that can be expected in terms of performance. But I would like to just look at the Optus one. Just go back to the top. And in fact, this map and a couple of the others that Mr. Billington's provided were in fact contained in my response as well. So you notice the key on the left-hand side talks about what's available and what's not available. A quick look at the map will show you that 4G is available in that area. But if you look on the side there, it tells you you've got 4G coverage, but no 4G internet, which indicates that the coverage area, the signal level in those areas is lower. 3G is not really relevant anymore. That's getting turned off in a few months. And for 5G, as it says at the top there, and with a little marker, is that it's not available in this area. As Mr. Billington points out, the 5G areas, and 5G has a smaller coverage area than 4G, is generally around those existing sites. The reasons for those coverage patterns are not, as Mr. Billington explained, they're not because the carriers decided not to cover 360 degrees. There may be other reasons that that's not occurring, but once you've established a site, whether you cover 180 degrees or 360 degrees, it doesn't cost any more to do that. If you move down to the second map, that's essentially the 5G just switched off. If you move on to the next map, so that's the Telstra 5G map, and we can see that the spot we're talking about is outside the 5G coverage area. 5G is a relatively new addition to the networks, and they're constantly expanding it. There's no basis to conclude that simply because there's just a road and a few houses and etc. that's the reason that that's not purple. That's incorrect, and it just means that there's no 5G coverage there yet. But 5G needs a much denser network of sites because it doesn't travel as far, but it's got huge advantages in terms of data speeds and the amount of people it can serve. On the response to representations, and I think it was at page 60 of the agenda, just let me check. Yes, so if we go to page 60 of the agenda, if that's possible, because the context of these maps is really important to understand. The maps that you've seen up on the screen now they don't tell you what frequency they're at, they don't tell you what signal level they're at, and as everybody would know, Signal levels are really important because at certain signal levels you won't have coverage in a building. You might have bars on your phone but you can't use it because the signal doesn't have sufficient capacity to operate. So whenever maps are generated for these types of applications, they use the same frequency and the same signal level so that the maps are directly comparable. These maps are not comparable to the maps of the websites. So what this is showing is the existing coverage in the area. Optus has been used in this particular instance, and this is showing that you can see the green area, which is minus 90 dBm, which is the in-building coverage level. And you can see there's a bunch of buildings there above the words Waterloo Corner that are not just dwellings, there's other structures there. And if you move down to page 61, you'll see the effect of this facility at that location. So that will bring that minus 90 dBm level at a 4G frequency of 1800 megahertz to that area. The reason 4G 1800 is selected is because that is the frequency your phone prefers to access, or your device, whatever it is, prefers to access the network. It will always try that layer first. So the availability of that layer is really important. It might then hand up to 5G or change to other frequencies depending on what's going on, but that is the most reliable level and layer to map so that we're always looking at the same things. And whenever these types of maps are provided for these types of applications, they need to be qualified in terms of what they're showing, what signal level and what frequency. So that's what these are all at. So it's not correct to say that just because something on a website says it's covered, that doesn't talk about is there sufficient capacity in the system, is there enough there to cover the demand that's being presented. None of those things are shown on those coverage maps. And this application is part of forward planning to ensure that those things are thought about and about where sites will go. It is true that Wavecon won't construct the site unless there is a carrier attached to it, so there's no need for the community or council to be concerned that these will get approved, they'll get built and hope that a carrier drives by, sees it and says, oh yeah, we'll go on that site. It's not going to work like that. In fact, it hasn't, and there's already been some built in South Australia, there's been quite a lot built on the East Coast, and the algorithm has been shown to be remarkably accurate in terms of the carriers selecting these sites because they are indeed what they want. And it makes no sense for Wavecon not to target these locations very carefully. So I don't agree that the need anticipated in the code is immediate need or need that needs to be demonstrated that a particular carrier needs it at this moment in time. This is in fact the very sort of economic and efficient provision, forward provision of infrastructure that I say the code in fact is looking for. The other matter that was raised was of the setback, and obviously I can only, pardon me, can only concede that obviously there is no setback and there is no landscaping. I'm not sure that either of those things, if it was in that particular location, if there was landscaping incorporated, and of course there is room in the compound for that would necessarily overcome the representatives' concerns. But the applicant is open to the idea of landscaping inside the compound if that's seen as a suitable outcome. It is the backdrop of the highway and the overpass. It's in a yard, as has already been pointed out, has got stuff everywhere, and it's not reflective of other parts of that locality. However, I'm not sure landscaping in that particular location is going to make much difference, but if the panel feels that it will, then the applicant's happy to receive that as a condition. The pole head frame antennas is conditioned, or it's suggested that it be conditioned that it be painted. That will certainly reduce any reflectivity or inconsistencies in the finish of the structure, and that's an appropriate condition. Whether or not the facility should be put behind a building on the site, obviously I'm not able to say whether or not that would be possible. The landowner would need to be involved, but where it is currently, there is the potential for landscaping and it could be incorporated. But the facility in terms of the cabinets and the pole is set back somewhat from the street frontage, and it is at the end of what is now a dead-end street. It's not a location that's passed by, and the the closest dwellings as well do not have certainly commanding views of this location because of the way that they've chosen to orient their dwellings, and including trying to reduce the impacts of the highway in particular. That's probably all I wanted to say, so I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for your submission. Questions, members? Yes, Paul.
Through the panel, through the chair, Mark, the areas that are currently shown, I think in your material, that currently have service or coverage, how is that coverage met at the moment? For example, I guess what I'm put another way, there's not a plethora of 30-metre towers in that area now, so how is that coverage currently provided? Does that make sense?
Do you mean how do people use their phones there now? Is that what you mean?
Well, how is the how are customers served in that area now without those towers, without any tower? Are there small cells?
Understand,
or?
yeah. No, so there's towers in the surrounding area. If you go to, just let me, hang on, I'll put my glasses back on. If we just go to, just trying to find in the planning statement, which I can't find. So it's in the planning statement, which is in the documents. I'm just trying to find the right page number for you. And there is a diagram, it's actually reproduced in the officer's report as well. And that shows the location of the surrounding facilities that's taken from the RFNSA, which is a radio frequency national site archive, which is a database of all the sites. Have you got the planning statement there? It's on about page 2 or 3 of that. No, not that one. Oh, it's actually reproduced on page 13 of the officer's report, which is page 13 of the agenda, which is the officer's report. But it has come out of page 2 of the planning statement, which is on page 20 of the agenda. That's the one. So what that shows is that's an extract from the Radio Frequency National Site Archive. The site we're talking about tonight is the one in the orange square, and the ones that are in green are existing facilities that are already there. So you can see there's 4 of them, and there's also a proposed small cell at a Telstra exchange down the bottom, which I've circled in red. For the purpose of this discussion, the small cell is probably not that relevant, and it doesn't exist. So the existing sites, which are around to the north of the Waterloo corner there, and you've got the one up alongside the Northern Expressway. So those sites provide coverage to the surrounding area. Like you would experience if you're out on a highway, you can receive coverage from a site that's a long way away. Radio waves travel, basically forever, but they get weaker as they travel further. In rural areas, that's not such a big deal, but in urban areas, it is a big deal because there's a lot more demand on services. So although you might be able to see a signal on your phone, etc., as demand increases, which is increasing all the time as people have more devices and do more things and become more reliant on them, with landlines declining, etc., the existing facilities are upgraded, 5G's added, things like that, but they eventually need more infrastructure somewhere else so that that part of the locality can be served by another location. So back in the days of 2G, there were a lot fewer base stations than there are now because the demand was lower, the sorts of things that we could do on our phones was less complicated. But as 3G came, 4G, now 5G, the demand on those services requires more infrastructure. And unfortunately, it's limited by proximity to the user. And the further the user gets away and the more users there are, that drives the demand for additional infrastructure. So those people are served by surrounding infrastructure, but it's the level of service and how sustainable that is over, looking forward, that's really the driver of these types of sites.
Thank you. Tied into that, when 5G was first being mooted prior to its introduction, I understood, or I heard an expert say that there was possibly a requirement for maybe 100 or 300-fold increase in the number of transmitting facilities, but that they'd predominantly be small cell type things. So where does a tower like this fit into that equation? Are we going to see less of those or the same number?
There'll always be a requirement for these types of facilities, which are called macro facilities, and then there are smaller facilities which generally sit under those. They don't tend to be in suburban areas unless there is a particular spot that might be poorly served. It might be in a gully or something like that. But there are lots of small cells. For example, in the Adelaide CBD, North Adelaide, there is an in-building system inside Elizabeth City Centre, so that there's a dedicated system that's inside that building that just services the inside of that building. But the surrounds of the centre rely on the macro sites that are around here, like the one in the Rose Tower, and they all work together to provide a network that's integrated and has sufficient coverage and network capacity. But it's not going to be a case of we'll just pull, those will get removed and everybody has a facility on a Stobie pole in their street, because that's not the idea of those sites. There are a range of technologies and service delivery infrastructure that's used to deliver those things. So I can't see I've been in this industry for a while, I can't see the end of these types of sites for many years, because they deliver so much capacity and coverage into the network where they're put that they solve lots of problems all at once. It's much harder to roll out 100 small cells on Stobie poles than it is to put in, maybe 3 or 4 of these.
Final question. What was consideration given to any other position on the land for the tower and the compound?
To my knowledge, there wasn't. This was a location that was agreed. I didn't do any of those negotiations, so I don't have first-hand knowledge of that. But this location was agreed because it was available and suited the landowner's use, and there's a lease in place for this particular location.
Yes, Misty.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions. So the first one would be, are there any other opportunities for, less obtrusive tower types? Like I know that often, and you just talked about having one in the shopping centre, are there opportunities to have smaller structures but maybe put on top of a building, etc.?
Well, in an area like this, there aren't any buildings that can go on. That's one of the difficulties and in a city like Adelaide, particularly the northern part, it's very flat. It's lots of suburbs, lots of, the largest sort of buildings in these areas might be industrial sheds and things like that. And unfortunately, there is operationally, height is really the key criteria for these types of facilities. They need to have sufficient antenna height so they can effectively service an area. And in fact, that in turn drives down the need for more facilities, because if they're more appropriately proportioned and placed, they work better. So in this particular location, I think no matter where it went, and I think I made this comment in my response to submissions, or response to representations, was that anywhere that it was placed in this area, it would be the same sort of structure. It would be a monopole with antennas on the top. And I suppose it would be a subjective question about, is this position better than this one, etc.
Thank you. My other question would be, again, why are we assuming a considered need for faster connections? I know that obviously the 5G itself is a shorter bandwidth and can be affected by more things. We've seen previously that there is already obviously connection out there. And I think the reality is for residents, if they actually knew how to change the preferred bandwidth on their phone, they'd find they have sufficient coverage already.
Well, the thing with the network is it's not just about the people that live around it. There's people pass through coverage areas. The network works as a as a whole. There are visitors to areas, there are residents in areas, there are businesses, there are transport corridors, all of those sorts of things. It's not, with respect, it's not sufficient to say, well, the people that live near it don't want it, or they don't use, whatever carrier. That's not how, unfortunately, how these types of facilities operate. And unlike electricity or gas or things like that, which you might be able to put underground, or if it's an overhead line, you might be able to run the line somewhere else that's more circuitous. These are very locationally specific because they need to fit in, they need to cover a particular area, and they need to fit into the network that surrounds them. You would appreciate that landlines and things like that are pretty much done. We've got NBN that comes to most people's homes, but that only services their needs when you're at home or you're at business or wherever the connection is. A mobile network serves a completely different purpose, and ubiquitous coverage, while it's probably not possible, is a very high expectation of customers, and the demand on the networks, they can see the growth. The growth is huge, and 5G, unfortunately, you're right, the frequencies are higher, therefore its coverage is lower, but its ability to do more things with less is quite incredible. It's 10, 20 times the amount of capacity.
Thank you. So just one final question. Would it be fair to say then that as we get to faster, shorter bandwidths, that we're going to essentially see towers popping up everywhere? Like what is the current range, I guess, of the 5G from this tower?
Well, you can sort of see it in that Optus slide gives you a bit of an idea. It's less than 1 kilometre. That doesn't mean that your phone won't be able to see it at a distance greater than that. The question is whether it's usable and how fast it is at that particular location. So I'm not sure of the signal levels that Optus is using in this particular map, but they're certainly sending the message in this map, I think, to say that it is limited and it's going to be reliable for only a fairly short distance around these facilities. It's not going to be required absolutely everywhere, but it is a very, very important part of the growth of networks because it's effectively the only way to keep up. And of course, it can be added to all existing sites. So they don't need to be an entirely new network of sites. In fact, that's what that map would be showing, 5G added to all of the existing Optus sites around the place. Thanks.
Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. Just one question through your presiding member. What's the process for a carrier coming to you and saying, yes, I'd like to use this facility? And in your experience, what's the likelihood of that carrier saying, this facility that's been approved doesn't meet our needs, we're going to go away and propose another tower in a different spot nearby?
Well, that's a good question. The answer is this. As I mentioned before, there is an algorithm that uses all of the existing tower locations. The map that we looked at before that showed the sites in the surrounding area, and that's a publicly accessible database. It's called the Radio Frequency National Site Archive, RFNSA. Every site in Australia is in that database, so that information is quite easy to get hold of. The frequencies that are being used at those locations is in that database. So Wavecon has developed, as I mentioned before, an algorithm which takes all that into account. It has certain weightings depending on whether you're in an urban area, a rural area. Here's a development area over here, it's going to have 1,000 lots, whether it's commercial, industrial, those sorts, whether it's highway coverage, and makes a decision about whether or not to pursue something in that area. When sites are selected, those lists of sites, regardless of whether they're at very early stage or they're at what's called land bank stage, which means they have a signed lease and a planning approval, are shared with the carriers regularly, every few weeks. So, so the carriers have access to those. One of the advantages for carriers is that and this is the TowerCo approach, is that the carriers don't have to pay for this infrastructure to build it. They have to pay to put their equipment on it and buy their equipment, etc. But the largest capital cost is in acquiring the site and building it. So the TowerCos now have taken that on, and as it hasn't happened as much here in South Australia, but I think that's just because there's a lower population, same in Perth. But on the East Coast, there have been well over 100 Wavecon sites built based on this model of selecting a location, putting it to the carriers, and the carriers have decided that they will have that. The advantage for them, of course, if they pick it, it can be on air in 3 or 4 months, as opposed to pick this location, acquire a site, get it approved. That could be 2 years. So the model has changed. This industry tends to move fairly quickly, and although the Planning and Design Code probably didn't anticipate this exact change, the need, what's driving the need, is still there. The future need to create, and in particular, actually this is a point as well that's worth making, is that the benefit of the Taucos and Wavecon as well is that their business is the carriers to locate and co-location, so more than one carrier. So councils can also, and the community can also be confident that these structures are able to be co-located on. I'm sure there would be plenty of stories from councils in the past where we can't co-locate on that structure because it isn't strong enough or there isn't enough room, that sort of stuff. These facilities are located, you'll see on the drawings there are 2 sets of equipment on the ground to demonstrate that 2 carriers can go there, and there's sufficient design capacity in the pole for 3 carriers. So that is, I guess, another benefit of this more coordinated approach. And yeah, as I said, all of this information is shared with the carriers. They're fully aware of what's available.
Yeah, thank you. And that, I see on the maps here, so they've got facilities shown that are approved, that have a DA but haven't been constructed yet. So
Which one are you talking about? The blue one? Are you looking at this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the ones in the green. Yes, sorry.
Do you see one that doesn't have a colour
That's right.
around
That one's
it?
in the city of Salisbury, and that one's been approved under this same sort of approach, but it hasn't been constructed yet. So that would be on a list for the carriers, but they haven't selected it yet.
Mark, can I just ask a few questions before we finish? I just want to drill down a little further into this this question of need. So, looking at the same plan that we have on the screen, there is a fair proliferation of existing approved facilities, obviously with this proposal for a further one. And I understand the explanation you've already given around proximity to the towers and coverage and speed, so I understand that. But the area is relatively sparsely populated, and there isn't a proliferation of dwellings in the area, understanding that it's not only dwellings that are obviously the occupants of dwellings who are users of the technology, it's also businesses and passers-by. But I guess I'm interested in the information that's led to the proposal that there's going to be a dramatic need in this area when it doesn't appear that there's a high number of users in this locality. I'm interested in understanding more about that.
Yeah, sure. So need doesn't just come about because of growth in terms of number of properties or things like that. Need comes about because of demand and increasing demand. And as I mentioned before in response to Paul's question, existing sites which were once completely adequate for whatever it was they were built for, there's been a densification of sites over time as demand has grown. That densification has come about because of customer demand, which grows quite significantly every year. And in fact, some years, during the pandemic, it doubled each year. So it comes about as part of that, but it also comes about because of the decline of landlines and fixed services and the reliance on mobile devices, and not just phones, wireless devices where people use wireless data for their laptops, for logistics, for all of those sorts of things. All of that demand needs to be met. It may not be able to be met by the existing network as that demand increases, depending on the types of land uses. And it, in particular, may not be able to be met consistently in terms of just because you have good coverage inside your workplace or whatever at this particular moment in time, as time goes on, demand increases in the area, there are changes to the configuration of the network. That means that now what used to be a good service is now a marginal service, or it's not as fast as it used to be, or that sort of thing. So placing additional infrastructure inside the networks, it's a lot cheaper to upgrade existing sites. It's a lot cheaper to co-locate because those things are already there. But at the end of the day, it's very locationally specific. Distance from the user is really important. And so eventually there's no choice but to build additional infrastructure. So as I mentioned before, the algorithms used to determine where those deficiencies lie and the types of land uses around them and whether or not it's worth pursuing something there. In this instance, and in fact that other coverage map that was on page 60 and 61, I think you can see it's not just the immediately surrounding residents. There's some commercial uses to the north-east, there's the highway, etc. So this is effectively strengthening the network in that area as well as providing new coverage.
All right, thank you. And then just a couple of additional questions. Now, it's obviously not the panel's role to redesign the proposal that's before us, but it is our role to obviously assess the proposal against the code and potentially consider any conditions or reserve matters that might be possible. So I'm just interested in understanding a little more about the offering of the landscaping. So you've suggested that it would be reasonable to landscape the facility within the compound. I'm assuming you're not suggesting outside of the compound because there's no lease arrangement for that at this point in time. But within the compound, what sort of opportunity actually exists for landscaping in terms of widths and so forth? Because normally those compounds are fairly tightly held with the amount of infrastructure that's in them. What can be reasonably anticipated in that regard if the panel was of a mind to support the proposal and wanted to see more landscaping?
Given that this particular facility is located on the street frontage with access directly from the street, it doesn't rely on access through the property, which means there are gates on the street frontage. So that is going to limit, obviously you can't have landscaping behind the gates. And what would typically occur inside a compound is a fairly compact form of landscaping that might grow tall but be fairly compact in its footprint. Sometimes there is landscaping put on verges, on council verges, trees, etc., where council nominates a type that they'd like to see there. That's slightly more difficult, obviously, because somebody needs to look after those trees and somebody needs to own them and all that sort of stuff, but it's not impossible. And obviously, as you said, the compounds are fairly tightly held. It's not going to be filled up with landscaping. That's operationally going to be very difficult to do as well. So there are, as I said before, there are limited opportunities, but I think there are some opportunities in that compound. However, I don't think that ultimately is going to make that much difference to the concerns that have been raised. So I suppose I would question the utility and the practicality of that, whereas something on the verge might be more appropriate, but there are some difficulties around that as well.
Okay, thank you. And one final question. You mentioned about painting of the monopole. I don't think that's proposed at this point in time, if I read the documentation correctly, but you were prepared to accept that something in that regard.
It's actually one of the conditions, yeah.
It is? Okay, yes, thank you.
And the particular colour that's been suggested is one that's been used quite widely in the city of Playford, but across Adelaide, and it's one that the ERD court has seen as quite a reasonable colour to use as well, and we're quite happy with that.
Thank you. Paul, additional question.
Yeah. You mentioned that the access is directly from the road. Is that always the case with the facilities by this company? And is it for convenience, or are there other reasons that say it's not at a back of a site? Is it for convenience only?
And also security, not just of the compound, but also for the balance of the land. So it's not reliant on, other gates that it might be locked or security systems, etc. There's a sort of a practical operational aspect to it too, that if there's direct access into the compound, then nobody needs to bother, what else is going on the rest of the land. There's no security issues. Yep.
Any last questions, members? In that case, thank you, Mark. Appreciate your time. Now, members, there is an opportunity for you to ask any questions of Council's administration. Of Andrew, do you have any questions you would like to ask? No. In that case, I seek your views on this proposal and application, members. You obviously have heard from the representatives and the applicant. You have all the application documents before you, and you have a comprehensive report from the administration and a recommendation that planning consent be granted. So I seek your views in respect of this matter, and in doing so I would remind you of the need to also cover in your comments whether you think the proposal is seriously at variance or not. So your views, members. Sheree.
I'll go first. Thank you, Presiding Member. First of all, I don't think it's seriously at variance with the Planning and Design Code. I'll make some further comments on what we've heard tonight, quite extensive detail, which has been very, very helpful from my perspective. So telecommunication towers, just one of those development types, largely driven by technical requirements, providing a service. They are considered to be an essential piece of infrastructure. And of course, the amenity of the locality and that balance of trying to service that need and protect the amenity of the locality in this instance is one that is balanced all the time. And I think in these circumstances, the amenity, I would say that, look, the site, in my view, absolutely contributes to the consideration of the level of amenity that currently exists. The highway does in terms of the visual amenity as well as the noise. I have considered the fact it's a no-through road and the orientation of residential properties nearby. So the question of whether it detrimentally affects the amenity of the locality, I think it is acceptable in this case, and that's balanced with what I've heard tonight about need. It is a really good question about whether or not this is an efficient way to deliver this sort of infrastructure. It is different, but having said that, I, from what I've heard and the technical responses that I've received, I believe that it is an efficient way of doing it, and there are mechanisms in place that if it doesn't meet the particular carrier's needs there, that can be adjusted if required. So in this circumstance, I think there's enough to support it against the code.
Thank you. Misty.
Thank you. I'm just going to repeat a few things that have been said throughout the course of the meeting. So in terms of the zone, we're looking at rural horticultural zone, which essentially envisages agriculture and value-adding activities. Telecommunications under the code are considered value-adding and essential infrastructure in this instance. In terms of the land itself, we've seen that it's obviously quite flat land, no vegetation, and there are no traffic concerns in relation to this matter. In terms of consistency with the zone, I've sort of put it as neutral. I feel like, you know, essentially a rural horticulture zone, some localities have this, some don't, so it's sort of a neutral aspect there. Scale and intensity of the development, I mean, it is quite tall when it's not obscured, and it is quite close to residences, so it is going to affect people in that matter. Does it complement or enhance the area? I mean, it could assist businesses. However, it was noted that there is current coverage there already. High impact to amenity, so obviously quite visible. I did have concerns with the proximity to houses, but I think we've seen from previous cases, which is sort of separate to this anyway, that that's not a consideration. And at this point in time, it is not seriously at variance with the code.
Thank you. Paul.
I also confirm that it's not seriously at variance. This is a proposal where there's actually very few policies in the Plan and Design Code to guide our assessment. One might say that might make our job easy, but I think it's actually not the case. There's nothing that speaks against the land use itself. The land is already removed from primary production, so it's not going to be at odds with the intended outcome of the zone. I note that hazard wasn't mentioned tonight. It was referred to in a number of representations, but regardless, courts have continually held that provided the national EMR standards are met, well then that can't be used as a ground to not support a proposal. In other words, it's deemed that the hazard does not exist. I note that there's no opportunity to co-locate. There have been no other facilities to attach antennas to. and we've heard from the applicant there's no suitable buildings either to attach a antenna. In that regard, it won't result in a proliferation of facilities. That being, in other words, it's been the first facility. So therefore, the final consideration is visual impact, and that's probably crucial in my view. I consider that, with respect, that limited attempt has been made by the proponent to minimise visual impact, with I think the only real attempt being to use materials and finishes with low light reflectivity and colours that complement the buildings and the surroundings. So that's the only, I guess, attempt to minimise its visual impact. It seems that the chosen position is primarily based on convenience, and I wonder whether that was the ideal site, but we have to consider what's before us tonight. I think I'm disappointed to not see any landscaping at all. I understand the reasoning that there's none on the site now, and many buildings are visible, but I do believe that opportunity exists, and landscaping would only enhance the proposal. Seems to be the view that the site has current low visual amenity, and therefore there's no need to attempt to try to hide the tower or the compound and the buildings within that. So, as I said, there's very few policies, but I think the critical one, and which I believe it fails on, is that that visual impact has not been minimised to the extent that it could, being a position that's highly visible in the corner of the site, and that insufficient consideration and measures have been taken to minimise visual impact. I don't expect that the tower would be hidden completely, but positioning behind buildings, suitable landscaping and the like can achieve that. With respect, I don't believe that putting a condition requiring landscaping would be appropriate, in that by looking at the plans there's actually no ability at all to provide landscaping within the compound as presented to us, and to provide landscaping on the site, which I think it should be, it would require the application to be amended to increase the setback, for example, from the street. And I believe that that's beyond the role of the panel. That's effectively redesigning the proposal. So, having said all that, I can't support the proposal in its current form.
Okay, thank you. I will very shortly run through my views in respect to the proposal. Just while I'm doing so, I might just ask the administration to consider the comments that have been made and around the possibility of reserve matters for landscaping, and whether you think that is an efficient way to handle the matter, or whether you agree with the view that's been put that, as that didn't form part of the application at this point in time, then doing so, particularly not knowing the land leasing arrangements and so forth, might be problematic. So I'll shortly come to you and ask for your views in respect of that. My views, members, first of all, I'm satisfied the proposal is not seriously at variance with the Planning and Design Code, while the use is not specifically listed in DPF 1.1. I think in the context of the desired outcomes and the nature of uses that are anticipated within the zone, a piece of infrastructure to support those uses is reasonably contemplated. Like Cherie, I accept that telecommunications facilities are essential infrastructure. And I also accept that the purpose of the rural horticulture zone is not to accommodate rural living and residential type development, and accordingly the level of amenity that can be expected in those areas is not, in rural areas, is not to the same standard as residential areas, and there will be impacts from various forms of development that can be expected to be experienced. Having said that, the zone isn't intended to accommodate telecommunications facilities either, virtually no zone is. So really it comes down to an assessment, I believe, of the impacts that the facility will have in context of the site and the particular locality. In my view, I accept that the applicant, I think, has adequately demonstrated the need for the facility. I think we were provided with some very good questions and prompts in that regard. In my view, I think the applicant has adequately addressed those. I'm satisfied that there is a need for the facility in this particular location and context. I also accept, there wasn't much discussion about this tonight, but I accept the information around the EME and the advice in that regard, that I don't think it's a relevant consideration for us this evening, and I also am satisfied that it's been satisfactorily addressed. With respect to visual impact, I accept the condition around the painting of the structure, and I think that's beneficial. However, I agree with Paul that the proposal, in my view, hasn't gone far enough in terms of taking steps to mitigate that visual impact. Having read the agenda, my position was that landscaping was required, and my view is, and the position I was prepared to take, was that we needed to consider a reserved matter or a condition in that regard. And that is why I flagged at the beginning of my comments that I would like the views of the administration as to whether or not it is appropriate to consider such a step in the circumstances, because if it isn't, that might alter my view. So I would appreciate it when ready if the administration could advise me whether or not they think a reserve matter would be appropriate to require a landscaping plan for consideration.
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. Look, in terms of planning practice, a landscaping plan by reserve matter is somewhat common in certain applications where the panel might consider there's a gap in terms of the detail provided, or opportunities to either provide that landscaping or enhance it to a sufficient degree, noting, of course, that within the bounds of this leased area, that will be somewhat limited within the existing compound.
Thank you. I guess I'm interested in just having a bit further advice around whether, given landscaping hasn't formed any component of the proposal so far, is it reasonable for the panel to impose a reserve matter that requires a landscaping plan for assessment?
Thank you, Presiding Member. The applicant, through the submitted plans, resolved not to provide any landscaping in the front portion of the site. Based on the provision that access to this leased facility is certainly far more, there's easier access for future maintenance and people attending the site, rather than traditionally they are located centrally or rear allotments where there needs to be coordination with landowners to obtain access at certain times that may be warranted. Landscaping is inherently a challenging one with telecommunication facilities. When you have a 30-metre high structure, this needs to be pretty significant landscaping to provide any real type of screening. Yes, they can form an element of screening, but the type of screening that we're talking about would really only be seeking to achieve to screen the actual lower component. in my assessment, I took the approach that given the existing amenity of this site, a small landscaping patch in that area wouldn't actually achieve a substantial degree of improving amenity. Hence, there wasn't a significant push for that to be added in this process, noting that the facility is only a very small component of the site, as they typically are in terms of their leasing arrangements. And if anything, that landscaping would probably be of a scale that would only seek to contain some of the smaller structures loaded at the ground level. Typically, these types of facilities, it's the monopole that's the issue in terms of impacts. It's not necessarily the facility at the base of the tower. Hence, there wasn't a significant amount of attention placed towards the provision of landscaping. Having said that, the panel can consider landscaping as an option. It's at your discretion. The applicant has indicated they are willing to consider that as a condition or reserved matter. So there is an option for that to be considered.
Thank you. So members, it would appear that we have a divergence of views. The recommendation at this point in time, as I suggested earlier, is that planning consent be granted, and at the moment it is subject to 3 conditions. My personal view, if I may offer that, is that I would certainly feel that a reserved matter regarding landscaping being provided for assessment to the satisfaction, or to the assessment manager for assessment, with the ability to impose further conditions post the assessment of that plan, would be a reasonable way to proceed, in my view. What I am asking for now is whether there is someone who's prepared to either suggest that approach or suggest an alternate approach, which might be moving the recommendation as is, or potentially moving an alternate recommendation. How do members wish to proceed? Cherie?
I'll move the motion as is.
Thank you. So Cherie's moving the recommendation as put. Is there a seconder? Seconder, Misty. Thank you. I will put that motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those opposed? So the motion is lost, as I have a casting vote as the presiding member, where we have a tied vote. And in exercise of that casting vote, I choose not to support that motion. So I'm now looking at members to see whether there is an alternate recommendation that someone wishes to put, or an amended recommendation for consideration. Yes, Paul.
I believe in the circumstances that the only way forward is to refuse the application. So I'd move that the application be refused on really essentially a single sole ground. As I said before, there's not a lot of policy to guide us, and therefore a single policy is probably all we can rely on, and that is performance outcome 6.3 in the general section, renewable energy and infrastructure section, in that the proposal is not designed and cited to minimise visual impact, or words to that effect. I'd move that.
Thank you. Can I just give the administration a moment, please, to come up with alternate wording for that recommendation? Thank you.
Sorry, Paul, just to clarify, it was 6.3 of which module?
Yeah, 6.3, and that insufficient attempts have been made to minimise visual impact.
It's the infrastructure and renewable energies module, Adam. Just while we're waiting, I will say thank you to the members of the gallery for your patience. We just need to make sure that in considering possible recommendations that we understand, have a clear read of the wording that is being proposed. So thank you for bearing with us just while we move through this process. Right, members, you now have an alternate recommendation on the screen before you. It is just being fine-tuned, I think, in terms of formatting, but you can read the wording there. I might just give members a moment to review that. All right, members, Paul has moved that recommendation. Before I ask for a second, are there any comments in respect to that, the wording? No? In that case, I'll ask if there's someone prepared to second that. I am prepared to second it. And now becomes the motion, and I will put that to a vote. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those opposed. So that is carried. So for the benefit of everyone in attendance this evening, that application has been refused planning consent. Now the applicant has a right of appeal that they may choose to exercise through to the Environment, Resources and Development Court. Whether they choose to do that or not is a matter for them. If you do have any questions as to how that process works, or any other questions in respect to the item and the consideration that has been given this evening, then you're more than welcome to address your queries to the Council Administration the next business day. They'll be happy to provide you with any advice. Now, thank you very much for your attendance. We need to move to our next item. You are welcome to either remain with us, or you're also welcome to depart. Sorry. Now, Mr. You'll depart. Thank you very much. Now, members, this is an application for a mixed-use retail and indoor recreation centre, including ice arena, basketball courts, children's play centre, cafe, change rooms and storage areas, tree damaging activity involving the removal of 13 regulated and 3 significant trees, and associated parking and landscaping. The applicant is the Pelligra Group, care of City Collective, located at lot 1259 Ashfield Road in Elizabeth, in both the Urban Activities Centre and the General Neighbourhood Zone. Was performance assessed, given notification, and the recommendation is to grant planning consent. Adam, you are the assessing officer for this application, or you are speaking to it today. Do you have any comments you would like to make as an introduction to the item?
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, I note the author of the application, David Story, is not in attendance tonight. However, yeah, I am familiar with the contents and recommendations, so more than happy to talk through any questions from the panel. With regards to updates, one of the representatives who did indicate they wish to be heard, they're unable to attend tonight, so they've prepared a written submission which we can table in the representation section. Aside from that, there's no update at this point.
Thank you very much. All right, members, we will now conduct our hearing of representations, which will run in the exact same fashion as it did earlier. A reminder to the representatives that we typically allow 5 minutes, and the applicant, we typically allow 5 minutes for your presentation, and if you do get close to that mark, I'll just ask you to begin summing up. Now, the first representative I had to be heard from this evening is Mr. Jordan Ritchie. Is Mr. Ritchie with us? No? Okay. I also had Miss Phoebe Archer. Miss Archer with us? No? Okay. Then had Miss Christina Pyers. Miss Pyers with us? No? In that case, the next representative I had to be heard was the representative that our assessment manager alluded to before, who was unable to be in attendance but has provided a written follow-up, which is Miss Beverly Rudnick. Now, that will appear on our screens shortly. Thank you, Sky. I'll just give members, the applicant and those in the gallery an opportunity to read that. Members, I believe everyone has had an opportunity to satisfactorily read that representation, so thank you, Adam and Sky, for arranging that. Now, the next representative to be heard, Mr. Conrad Easterling. Mr. Easterling with us? Yes. Would you like to come forward, please? Thank you.
Got my water bottle. You hear me all right? Hear me back there? Yeah? Case? Hear me okay? All right. Hi. Oh, this is my lady. I can't hear that well, so he's got to listen, see if I miss something. Hi guys from Pelligra. You both got the same haircut. Bit of a giveaway. Okay, do you want me to start? All right. My name's Conrad Easterling. I'm a representative of the Save the Trees, Birds, Animals and Us Playford Action Group. The thrust of the group is to try and keep Elizabeth nice and beautiful, and keep the flowers and trees growing properly, and improve the local amenities, which have slipped away, in our view, in the last few years. The problem that we've got with this proposal is that it seems to be completely in the wrong spot. The Paliga Group, which are the builders, do have the Lionsgate area which they could put the ice skating rink, the rock climbing, the gymnasium and whatnot. Now in this particular area, that's all duplicated. There is already a gymnasium. There's 2 gymnasiums within 100 metres. Now none of this work that goes on or the playing activities would be good for the lungs. I was an all-state rugby player. I used to run around the oval 3 times a night, and when you draw the lungs in very hard, you bring in particles of 2.5 ppm. This is the modern stuff. This council chamber is actually built in the pollution zone all the way down the main North Road. So in our view, this has always been a planning disaster. If you want to shorten your life expectancies, try taking deep breaths, because you'll be drawing in 2.5 ppms, and when they're deep in your lungs, they don't go out again. So if you want to contemplate asthma, lung cancer, whatever, this is a really good council chamber to do it. A nice little exercise bike here will make certain that you're shortening your life expectancy. Harvard Health says you shouldn't exercise anywhere near a minor road. You shouldn't run within 50 metres of a road. What they're proposing is guys are going to be kitted up, skating like buggery, because I was an all-state player, really trying their absolute best and killing themselves, because this is absolutely in a complete pollution zone. Now, Paliga's got a nice spot over in Limegates, big areas that they can put this stuff in. And there's a nice spot on Judd Road. The group thinks that Playford want to use the car park. The whole purpose of putting this thing here is to activate the car park. It's already being called the White Elephant. It's in the advertiser as a jokey sort of thing. So they want to promote the Paliga Group, which are good guys. I can see they're good builders and everything. They do pump concrete buildings. I've seen some of their work. It's really nice. But it's just crazy putting it there. One of our group members who's gone into this says there's a change to land use. There'll be three changes to the land use. It's going to tread all over the people's usage in the area. The land use interface is going to be changed. There's no community service, allied health, employment care is being offered with the development. It does not contribute to a low-rise suburban character. In fact, it exceeds the designated height of 2.4 metres. There's no community services being offered by the development, except in my view, a fairly unhealthy occupation of terracing around with a hockey stick, trying to reduce your life expectancy. All top sportsmen pick up injuries. It's bad enough. I mean, I've lived with lifelong injuries. It's bad enough to live with a lifelong injury without bringing in breathing pollution into your lungs. The development overwhelms rather than complements the residential character. The commercial actors are too intense to remain the amenity. We're supposed to walk around our area and enjoy it, but they're going to smack a great big building in with high-level air compressors in, using lots of energy. It's supposed to be green. South Australia is supposed to be green king or something. We haven't even got a roller skating rink in Elizabeth. It's just completely inappropriate. Desired outcomes, it does not deem to satisfy the provisions of the desired outcomes of the area. We're not saying that they shouldn't do it. It's just they've got other spots to put it. Playford Council can whack this over on the Ridley Road Oval, which is really nice. I used to run around it was great. Or they can stick it over in Lions Gate, but it doesn't have to be up on houses. Development does not support a walkable, active, convenient neighbourhood. On the contrary, it supports 250 car parks, additional traffic, people in the neighbourhood less inclined to walk or cycle. We need the roads around there are 6 metres wide. In order to have commercial stuff, it's supposed to be 9 metres. So all those roads have to be redone. There's absolutely no point to it. You don't smack. It's supposed to be commercial. It's not a sports arena. Okay, that's my 5 minutes. I can go on if you want. But basically,
I'll just ask you to sum up.
It's it's just completely inappropriate. I lived there all my life. It's a really nice area, but it's just being run down. We need people to stand up like our action group and our friends back there to say, yeah, okay, that's fine. Bring more sports into Elizabeth, but for heaven's sake, don't make our young people sick in the process. You know, and I see that as an inevitable outcome. You might think you can relieve pollution and you're going to live a long life. You won't. You know? So we obviously don't support the motion. You might have guessed.
Thank you. Members, do you have any questions? No. In that case, thank you.
All right, thanks very much for listening.
Now, members, I'm just going to depart from calling the next representative just to say, Mr. Easterling, I'm not sure if I heard your comment with respect to the woodpile correctly, but if I did, it's a completely inappropriate comment and I condemn it. And language like that has absolutely no place in our chamber. So I will ask any person to refrain from making any such comment because it's completely inappropriate. Now, the next representative to be heard, Mr. Peter Ruett. Is Mr. Ruett with us?
Mr. Ruett said he was second on April 10th. I didn't hear what you said.
It's all right. I've made my point and you've had an opportunity to have your say, so thank you. Now, Ms. Neve Colbert. Is Ms. Colbert with us? Did you want to have a say, Ms. Colbert? You were listed as a representative to be heard. Sorry, Ms. Colbert. I'm happy for you to speak. I just want to make sure that anyone who's online, if we do have anyone, is able to hear you. So I just wondered, are we able to maybe set up a microphone where Ms. Colbert could just step forward to the seat slightly, or if that's possible, or could we bring a microphone to Ms. Colbert just so we can make sure that she has an opportunity to have a say and be heard? Sorry, Ms. Colbert, I just want to make sure you have the right opportunity. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just a bit worried that that area between, certainly the times we've lived there, which is 20 odd years now, that area between Main North Road and Ashfield Road has been neglected for, you know, quite a long time. I note that other areas that have had this urban renewal have had trees planted, you know, areas like Smithfield and that sort of thing, and it looks quite beautiful. But the area, I'm sorry to say, has just been neglected. There are trees falling everywhere. Some of the trees aren't even native. A lot of them are weeds. Just the other day, I saw about 4 deadly nightshades. You know, just a patch of them in one area, and this idea to build an ice skating ring is just ludicrous. There's a whole lot of noise we hear now on the Main North Road, the sirens, the ambulance sirens, the fire sirens. You hear it at night all the time coming in through the back door. If we have this recreation facility, there's going to be more noise, there's going to be more trouble, there's going to be more rubbish, and there's just going to be more traffic along Ashfield Road and more parking. I mean, you look at Haydown Road, for instance, and you can't. There's just parking where the hospital is. Everybody parks on Haydown Road, and I can see the same thing happening along Ashfield Road. And we're not having a quality of life because the continuous dumping of rubbish on that nature strip, and the council just aren't taking care of it. The other thing I'm worried about, of course, is the use of electricity, all that electricity that needs to be used to keep the ice skating ring going. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Colbert. Are there any questions? No. Okay, thank you. Thank you to the representatives who made your points well. Now, that was all of the representatives I had on my list who indicated a desire to be heard. So there's now an opportunity for the applicant to respond. Now, I understand that will be delivered by Miss Renee Greeter of Future Urban. So would you like to come forward, please, Renee? Yes, yep, thank you. Now I understand you might be accompanied by Blake Sorkin from Polygra, and yes, and also I know we've got Ben Wilson from Circa online as well. So you're able to respond to the representations when you're ready, please, Renee.
Thank you, Presiding Member, and thank you, representatives, for your comments. To begin with, I'll respond by not making any comment on life expectancy. I'm not qualified to comment on that. In regards to appropriate locations, you know, referring to Lionsgate's completely irrelevant to this proposal. It's not where the application is being proposed. But with respect to this one, the Urban Activity Centre explicitly talks about providing a range of recreational facilities in proximity to transport infrastructure and close to the CBD. And the general neighbourhood zone, which also applies to the site, talks about supporting non-residential development that's located to improve community accessibility to services and primarily in the form of recreation facilities as one of those suggested outcomes. Maintenance of the nature strip, and as you heard, one of the representatives did refer to it as weeds. That's outside of our control. Council's responsible for maintaining their current property, but as a result of the development, there is considerable landscaping and upgrading to the site. In terms of building height, 16.2 metres. Yes, it's over the general neighbourhood zone, but the building is designed to taper and lower as it approaches the residential area. The Urban Activity Centre zone has no height limit, and we are considerably on par to the existing bulky goods outlets adjacent and the Windsor car park. With respect to noise, sirens from ambulances and trucks, that's all just a part of life, unfortunately. But with respect to the development, we have a report from SONUS that deals with noise impacts from mechanical noise, the gym, and the building itself will actually limit traffic noise considerably. With respect to parking, I'll pass that over to Ben, who's online, if that's okay.
It is, thank you. Ben, you're welcome. Yep, thank you.
Thank you, panel and Renee. I'll deal fairly quickly with the traffic and parking comments from the representatives. They were fairly brief in the description, but feel free to ask any questions when it gets to that time period. In terms of the traffic impacts, we've acknowledged there will be an increase, obviously, as a result of the proposal. There's been a number of studies undertaken in this area, not just by ourselves in respect to this development, but prior studies by BE Engineering Services for the broader activity centre, including this site, and also some work done by Tonkin. They've all essentially reached the same conclusions. It's been reviewed by council staff as well as DIT staff, and from a traffic impact assessment, all of those entities, including ourselves, are comfortable with the impact. Similar arrangement for the parking conditions associated with the site. It's important to say, though, we acknowledge that as it stands, there would be a potential for parking impact on Ashfield Road, but it's important to note there are some separate discussions that have been undertaken with council and ourselves in respect to broader considerations around parking management and local traffic management around the surrounding area that is being undertaken separate to the development application. So there is certainly an intent to minimise impacts on that surrounding area through appropriate management. And the reason why that hasn't been tied to the development application itself is because it needs to go through direct community consultation and surrounding residents be given the opportunity to advise what controls they would like to see. But there are processes happening around that, which should give some confidence around it's not just the parking that's provided on this site, as well as the broader urban activity centre. There is a management piece around that, which council staff perhaps may also be able to provide some commentary on as well, just to confirm what I've just said. But overall, that's where the traffic and parking situation sits, but feel free to ask me any comments as the time arises. Thank you.
I'll close with just a comment around zoning. The site is zoned urban activity centre with a portion of it sitting within the general neighbourhood zone. It's not zoned open space and it is not zoned recreation, meaning that the site is capable of being developed for its intended use, and in this case, the recreational facility as proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee and Ben. Do you have questions, members? Yes, Paul.
A question to Ben relating to access and traffic distribution. Ben, can you explain why the forecasted distribution for the northern access is higher than the southern one? Is that based on the assumption that users will sort of try their luck and get in a car space at ground level before going into the underground car park? Does that make sense?
Yes, that's a factor in it. The primary reason is really just the level of accessibility via the Phillip Highway compared to the broader road network. In particular, Main North Road being a much higher speed environment than Ashfield Road. So movements from the south, it will be a lot quicker to come to the site via Main North Road. Similarly, from the north, northeast and the west, Phillip Highway provides a higher degree of accessibility versus routes to the south. Also, just the general catchment and where that's located, the catchment to the south and southwest is relatively limited. We have acknowledged there will be a proportion of movements that will occur via Ashfield Road south of the site, but proportionally that the distribution will be primarily to and from the north of the site and by extension that northern access point.
So just a follow-up question. So you don't believe that the human behaviour might differ from the modelling and that people might actually choose to use the southern access rather than the northern one and go directly to the underground car park, which would then, what impact does that have on your traffic distribution modelling?
The modelling is theoretical. There's obviously going to be variance day to day between the way in which people choose to access the site. The northern access for the primary movement, which will be inbound to the site, will largely be to the north because that's the first opportunity people have. On egress, our distribution has a higher proportion of egress movements going out the southern access compared to what we have coming in at that side. So there is a reflection that people will come in probably at the first opportunity, but then there'll be a split between the at-grade car parking where movements go to and from that location and then the basement car park as well. Now that may vary day to day between an additional 5 to 10 movements at the southern access and less at the northern. It'll differ day to day, but the overall impact of that is relatively minimal.
Okay. Further questions, members? No, excuse me, I'm sorry, but I can't. No, sir, please. No, please, sir. What I'm suggesting is that the way the meeting procedures for the council assessment panel work is that representatives have an opportunity to have a say, then the applicant responds, then the panel considers the matter. I cannot allow comments from the floor because it simply disrupts the meeting and it's inappropriate. Now, as I was saying, members, further questions? In that case, I'll have a few, please, Renee. One to you first, which is in the documentation that we've got, there's there appears to be two landscaping plans titled Option 1 and Option 2. Have we arrived at a final option that's being considered? There's commentary in the staff report around this, and if memory serves, there's conditions, but I'm a little unclear on what landscaping proposal we're actually considering.
Thanks, Presiding Member. I might defer to Blake on that one, if possible. Has there been... Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair. Pelligra has conditions under our contractual obligations with council to deliver a public realm landscape plan that ties in with the broader precinct. So at this point in time, we haven't concluded an exact option, but in any respect, whatever is delivered through a future landscape plan would need to tie in with the broader concept that's being worked on in the background between council as landowners and vendors and Pelligra as the applicant and developer.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. I think that might be all the questions I have for the applicant. I've got a few for council staff, which we'll get to momentarily. Any final questions, members? In that case, thank you, Renee and Ben.
Thank you.
Now, members, there's an opportunity for questions of council's administration.
Thank you, through the chair. I don't know who I'm talking to. Oh. Just a question upon some of these agreements that are happening with, or discussions that are happening with council. There seems to me there's a few elements of this application that are reliant on working with council on some solutions, or in particular, for example, the landscape plan, which Jeff briefly mentioned before, but also the fact that the majority of landscaping is on council land for this development, and is there an expectation that and council satisfied that they'll take on full responsibility for all the landscaping around that area, because we need to assess this development as it stands, and that means if council isn't satisfied with that, this development doesn't really have much landscaping. There's other little things, well, it's actually not a little thing, but traffic and parking, which was talked about before, about there is it's said in the report, a minor shortfall of car parking, but I'd be interested to know, well, if you're doing if it's reliant on a full study of doing a local traffic management plan of the area, which includes parking on the street, that could impact the assessment of this application. The other thing is, bicycle parking, for example, it's not really provided, but it's going to be considered in a council walking and cycling plan, for example. So I would just like to know a little bit more about what sort of discussions have been happening, and I guess council's position on all of those elements.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, look, I'm able to call a member of council's repurposing assets team who'll be able to speak to the specific agreements and some of the works that's happening in the background. I suppose with regard to the current application that I do, that is designed to stand on its own, noting there is some ancillary works happening around the site which council would be facilitating.
Panel members, my name's Eddie Bergman. I'm from the repurposing asset team. Regarding the landscaping issue, the applicant did mention, correctly so, that the landscaping will be tied in with what's a public realm project, which is currently being undertaken, or just commenced. And what that will be addressing is basically the streetscaping. Not just for this site, but also for the CBD sites. We're looking at the overall for the overall CBD project, and including this site. And the point of this project is to address the streetscape, which will provide for obviously landscaping, shared paths, and possibly lighting with street lighting in the required particular areas. So, and the intent of the public realm is to provide a high quality streetscape and amenity, And also, just importantly, and I don't think it's been picked up, is to improve connection throughout the city, you know, from our current tennis centre or sports precinct all the way up through to the CBD. Does that answer the question? All right.
Perhaps can I just ask, sorry, before I think there are a few more questions for you. So,
Okay.
Can I just clarify though, is the council satisfied that the contractual arrangements that were mentioned before that are in place for the delivery of the public realm and the landscaping and so forth are satisfactory to ensure that the applicant funds their necessary component of the work or contributes to the necessary component of the works in the way that council determines is appropriate, and that should the panel choose to grant consent to the application tonight, that wouldn't remove any of the, or I guess undermine those contractual obligations?
The answer is yes. There is, council has signed a contract with Pelligra. Within the contract itself, there's an obligation from the developer to contribute to the public realm.
Was there any further comment on the parking matters that were being looked at by the council?
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to address that one. Yeah, as mentioned in the response from Circa, there has been a number of studies done within the area, and part of the work council's done across the whole CBD is sort of trying to get a gauge on what future demands may or may not be, and it is something council needs to monitor going forward, and that was largely the findings of those reports, is that until the development functions, we won't have that understanding, because a lot of it is theoretical at this point, but council's well aware of those obligations as things progress.
Thank you. Now, members, yes, Paul.
Two questions at this point. Adam, could you expand on the comment on page 73 about where a proposal is in more than one zone, that the code says something about the relevant authority can determine policies to be considered? Can you expand on that, please?
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, it's one of the, I suppose, the quirks of undertaking assessment where you do have multiple zones is the sort of the rules of interpretation of the code itself provide some direction with regard to that, wherein the assessment to the parts or elements of the development within that zone is what the assessment. Basically, if it's located within a certain zone, you assess that portion of the development against the zone provisions. So in this instance, we do have a bisecting zone. So a portion of this development is located within the general neighbourhood zone, and that's why there's a section in the report which talks to those provisions. Similarly, the activity centre zone is talked to as well.
Thank you. Next question relates to the road widening. I'm a little confused, to say the least, about the provisions that the department's response is that up to 4.5 metres will be required. But I note that the building is actually built up to that boundary on Main North Road. So how does that work? Are they referring to 4.5 within the road reserve? And that's not a road widening. I'm just a little confused by all that.
Yeah, look, with regard to the application, DRT have reviewed the location of the building and confirmed that the location isn't within the road widening or affected area. Just 2 seconds.
Through the chair, I think it's clear to say the department wouldn't support the application if it was against their road widening provisions. The section they were referring to is that within the verge, so we're aware of that, with considerations to whether that left-hand turn may be needed to be expanded at a later point, but confident that the development isn't affected, and accordingly the department has supported the proposal.
Thank you. Would it be fair to say, reading, I think, the note that's been directed by the Department of Infrastructure and Transport, that it speaks to that possible requirement for a strip of land being required, and that a copy of the approved plans, if approved, need to be provided on that basis, I am assuming?
Yeah, that's correct. If the application were to be approved, we'd provide a copy of those to DIT. They have been involved over the duration of the process, and as Matt talked to, they provided their support based on the plans they were provided with.
Yes, Paul. Yep.
So to put it in simple terms, we're not going to see, if this is approved tonight and the development's constructed, then in 10 years' time that the government's not going to compulsorily acquire a portion of the site to widen the intersection.
Look, I'd hate to second guess the Department of Infrastructure and Transport and their considerations. However, given they've provided a written response, I think, yeah, that would be unlikely.
Any, unless do you wish to seek clarification on that from the applicant? Because they might be able to offer something. Yes. Would you like to come forward, Renee?
Through the chair, thank you for the opportunity to clarify this comment. If you look at the ground floor plan in the application documents, if we could please bring that up on the screen. Unfortunately, I don't have the full agenda with me. I've only got the plans. But effectively what you'll see is two red lines. So we've actually accounted for that setback, and the building's not on the true boundary. It's set back 4.5 metres from the true boundary, meaning that we have accommodated for that requirement already. There's also been a land division that is yet to be approved but will be submitted or approved. I would have to confirm that with the applicant, sorry, which will actually move that boundary line so that that 4.5 portion will be excised from the current allotment. So that, I guess what we're saying is that that land has already been considered, and we're not building within the road widening portion. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Further questions, members, for the administration? No. All right, thank you. In that case, I seek your views in respect of this matter. You obviously have heard from the representatives and the applicant. You have all the application documentation, a detailed report from the administration in front of you. As I said, the recommendation is to grant planning consent subject to a number of reserved matters and conditions. And again, as I mentioned before in your commentary, please provide your views on the seriously at variance question. What are your views in respect of this matter? Paul?
Firstly, I'll confirm that I don't believe the proposal is seriously at variance with the code. I think it's important to firstly note that the panel can't concern itself with any previous decisions to revoke the community land classification or to sell off the land. That's those decisions have been made and are beyond our ambit, which then requires us to look at the development plan policies alone. The uses proposed are generally envisaged in the zone, in particular the urban activity zone, and although the scale is probably not what was anticipated in the general neighbourhood zone, these uses are not out of character or incompatible with that zone and its intent. and in the context of the locality and the proximity to the Elizabeth Town Centre, I believe that it's an appropriate location for these facilities. The building does have, on paper, limited setbacks, but it has been clarified just before that the boundaries are, it's not technically on the main North Road boundary but set back. But I do note that it is on the southern boundary, which typically would be a concern. However, and I would have liked to have seen some landscaping in that location, but given that the design itself is with the various elements of articulation, it's not an unattractive building on that southern boundary, and not unpleasant to the degree that it needs to be screened. I note that Wilcox is already experiences commercial traffic, including waste collection and loading and unloading. And also I'd expect that it can also currently experience a lot of traffic accessing the shops on Phillip Highway, and also perhaps even to access the town centre. However, waste collection and traffic access will be new elements for residents opposite the site, and I'll come back to that in a moment. I think the design of the intersection with Ashfield and Wilcox is certainly designed for Wilcox to be the main road, and the traffic modelling shows that that will continue to serve that purpose, and that the right turn from Phillip Highway into, I think is it Ogden or something like that, will continue, and that will provide I think, primary access to the facility for people entering the area from the southwest and the west as well, because they can't turn right from Phillip Highway. So that road, in my view, won't see a lot of change from or the nature of that road won't change a lot from what it currently is. The parking, I guess reluctantly agree that the parking rate for the urban activity zone should be applied, and that's therefore treating this as a designated area, and that there may be a shortfall on occasions, particularly when there's events. I'm unconvinced that users would actually utilise the Windsor car park, given the distance and the need to cross Phillip Highway. And while I note that council was considering improvements such as crossings and refuges, in the meantime, I think it would be more than likely that if the car parks are full and fully occupied on the subject site, that users are more likely to park for free on the local streets rather than in the paid multi-storey car park. But I do note that those occasions will be limited to perhaps 13 times a year when there's major events, and that the proponent is working with council for a traffic management plan for large events. In regard to parking, I also accept that there will be a degree of multi-use trips, and that it is unlikely that the facility such as a cafe or the restaurant will be a destination visit, rather it will be frequented by users of the other facilities within the complex. So I'm happy with the car parking provision and the ratio and the arrangement. I'm not happy with the approach to bicycle parking. On the one hand, well, Circa itself, the traffic assessment recommends adoption of the rates as if this was a designated area, and I think they reference something like 50 plus bicycle spaces would be required, but the designers have chosen not to provide any. And I think, with respect, while it's well and good having end of trip facilities such as showers and the like, it's not very useful if there's no actual places to park the bike. So I think it's a minor element, but I think if they're wanting to adopt the car parking ratio for a designated centre, they should also in turn apply the same ratio for or similar ratio for bicycle parking. And that's perhaps if it is approved, that could be a reserved matter that we seek more information on. This is a large facility or a large scale building, or perceived to be a large scale building on an area that for probably 70 or 80 years since Elizabeth was developed has been, I guess, what the locals would regard as open space. But as was mentioned earlier, it is zoned for both general neighbourhood and urban activity. Has gone through a process of community land revocation and sale, and therefore development should be expected on that site. I think the setback of the building from the adjacent residential areas and the design elements and articulation and the like, it won't be in my view, it won't be an unpleasant design or building outcome, and with public realm landscaping, retention of the trees along the Ashfield Road frontage, and additional landscaping, the amenity will be it'll fit in quite appropriately, I believe. So subject to that concern about bicycle parking, I generally support the proposal.
Thank you. Sheree.
Thank you, through the chair. I also agree that this development isn't seriously at variance within both the urban activity centre zone and the general neighbourhood zone. So I'll start off by saying, talking about my other comments relating to the fact that this has been a long-winded, drawn-out process, it looks like, for council, and certainly with the community land designation that's been revoked now some time ago, and there's been land divisions, there's been aligned with the contract of sale. This development has undergone significant pre-lodgement reviews, including getting advice from an urban design specialist, I know, noted as well, and particularly the consideration of the trees by a qualified arborist. So the council's been quite intimately involved in the steps along the way. Technical aspects relating to traffic, car parking, access, stormwater and trees, as I mentioned before, have been satisfied by the council staff, but not only from, I guess, from the council's point of view, but also from a development assessment point of view. I did like just to comment on the report. I thought the report was well laid out in terms of being able to explain the two-zone issue, the fact that the different headings, and it was structured so as to talk about the land use, built form, parking, etc., and all those requirements required in each zone. It laid out very clearly what we needed to focus on. It is a landmark site, and I think this is why, I guess, the attention has been given, or so much attention has been given to this, and I think actually the outcome will be pretty good, and will service a wide proportion of the community. I think the applicant's design response to the site and the context in terms of its built form is pretty good, is excellent, I'd say. I think it's going to be a really nice building. The architectural elements really speak to, I guess, more the ice skating rink as the main component, or the most, prominent component, and I think that was a really good idea. And I think also how it interfaces with the residential properties within the general neighbourhood zone, it does it well as well. I have talked about landscaping before and satisfied that the council is looking at that in a holistic point of view, as well as I mentioned before, traffic and car parking. I was concerned about bicycle parking as well. I thought that was a real missed opportunity, considering it is a recreation land use, I guess, and also because it is a centre, you do want to encourage more people using different forms of active transport to get to this place to reduce the number of cars required. Anyway, it is, again, I'll say I wouldn't say it's a minor element, but it's growing in its importance, so I think it should be considered as part of Council's overall strategy for local traffic management and cycling and walking strategies. But having said that, I do think there's enough here for acceptance against the Planning and Design Code as it stands, so I'll be supporting the application.
Thank you, and I have similar views, members. It sounds as if we are all generally in agreement. I, first of all, accept the proposal is not seriously at variance with the Planning and Design Code. I think the land use is envisaged in the urban activity zone and at least contemplated to maybe at a lesser scale on the general neighbourhood zone. I would offer thanks to the representatives and applicant who provided us with additional information that has assisted our decision-making process tonight. I guess to run through my points, I accept that the use is appropriate and envisaged in the urban activities zone, as I suggested before. DO1 contemplates recreational and entertainment facilities, and performance outcome 1.1 lists indoor recreation centres as an envisaged use, so it clearly complies with that criteria. The proposal is typical of the type of use to be expected in this sort of zone, and we do see a number of other, I guess, similar type facilities located at a lesser scale throughout the Elizabeth City Centre. The general neighbourhood zone doesn't contemplate development to this scale, but I think what's relevant here is that it does contemplate, in my view, some recreational facilities that you could reasonably expect to find in a residential area. So that might be a basketball court or a tennis court, for example, or other open space and recreational facilities. This is obviously in built form and at a significant scale, but it is right on the outskirts of this portion of the general neighbourhood zone is right on the outskirts of the urban activity zone. And so in my view, I think it's reasonable to expect something of this scale within that area. The appropriateness of the proposal within the general neighbourhood zone really, I think, comes down to some of the wording and some of the policies in the general neighbourhood zone that talk about the proposal complementing the character and amenity of the area and maintaining residential amenity. Whether or not that can be achieved is really down to the particulars. So, turning to the particulars, I'm satisfied with the scale and design of the building. They are substantial, but I think that the building has been designed to provide a reasonably high level of visual interest through articulation in the built form and high quality use of materials and colours. So I was satisfied that it would have a reasonable visual impact on the locality. It complies with the height requirement of 2 levels, but I think it quite obviously doesn't comply with the height limit that is associated with that, which I think is 9 metres in this case. This is 16 metres, so well and truly over and above that. But I do think when you look at the locality, there is some other elements of a built form that are much higher to a substantial degree. You would expect the lower elements to be toward the edges of the zone, and I think that's what's occurred here. So I was satisfied with the level of height. I thought the details around stormwater were all reasonable, and Council's engineering department was satisfied with that. I think that some of the setbacks in the built form also assisted in minimising some of the impacts and assisted those elements of design. I thought the the inclusion of the basement car park was beneficial and a good way of accommodating vehicle parking spaces which are out of sight for the locality, minimising the visual impact. I guess in terms of the parking, I generally have a view that parking rates should be complied with as a basic planning principle, but I do think in this instance, the adoption of the designated area rates is entirely appropriate. This site is, for the most part, within an urban activity centre. Those are the areas where you would expect other forms of transport to be utilised, more so than perhaps in just general neighbourhood areas, which obviously don't normally form designated areas. So I think that is the appropriate rate to adopt. I understand the rationale around the shortfall. I feel that the rationale, well, I feel that the shortfall, it would be more ideal if there was no shortfall. I do actually think there will be some impact on the adjacent local street network. And so it's pleasing to hear that there's some work happening associated with this between the council and other parties around addressing traffic impacts in and around the local street network, because I think that will be necessary. I guess finally the impact on vegetation. I think it's regrettable. The removal of any regulated or significant tree is not an issue to be taken lightly. What I was pleased about here was that some of those trees along Ashfield, I think it is Avenue, were due to be retained as part of the design, and I think that's pleasing. I also think we're going to get a new landscaped public realm as a result of this development, and I think arguably if that's done appropriately and properly, we could get almost an enhanced outcome from a landscape and visual amenity perspective than what the current situation is. We heard earlier that the area is perhaps not maintained to the expectation that the community has at this point in time, and it's more than likely, with the proposal being supported, we'll end up with a higher level of maintenance and a higher quality public realm than we currently have. So for those reasons, members, I'm also in support, and it sounds as if we are all in agreement. However, there might be some possible changes to reserve matters, conditions and so forth. I know we flagged the possibility of a reserve matter around bicycle parking, and also just touching on a landscaping issue I raised before. The condition 7, I think it is at the moment, suggests that landscaping shown on the plans herein approved. The unfortunate part is that we're faced with 2 landscaping options at the moment, and as we've heard, there are negotiations ongoing around what that landscaping looks like. I think my preference would be that landscaping was also incorporated in a reserve matter, and that that condition was struck off, such that a landscaping plan can be reviewed and agreed with the assessment manager, and then further conditions can be imposed that it take place in accordance with that. But I'm happy to take the views of the administration. Obviously, we want to make sure that those trees on Ashford Avenue are retained as part of this. So, Adam, do you wish to comment on those potential reserve matters and changes?
Yeah, thank you. Look, yeah, we're able to draft reserve matters in that respect. Landscaping plan as a reserve matter we have seen on other applications, and the cycle parking would be an update to the existing parking plan, so that would also be appropriate for a reserve matter.
All right, members, I'm seeing nods, so perhaps I might ask the administration if they can commence drafting those additional reserve matters, and then Adam, I'll take your advice on whether condition 7 should remain on there or not. Members, while we'll wait for the wording to be produced before I call for a mover, so I'll just ask the gallery to please bear with us while we make sure we have the appropriate amended wording, and I'll put the matter to a vote, and depending on the outcome of that vote, I will explain how the process works from here.
Yeah, thank you. Look, with regard to condition 7, there's two options to the panel. It can be removed at this point and reinserted once the reserved matter has been discharged. The portal does allow for additional conditions once the reserved matter has been addressed. I'm happy to take the direction from the panel. Otherwise, it can remain as drafted and would then come into effect once that landscaping plan is provided and approved by council.
Well, thank you for the advice. And in light of that, I'm happy for the condition to remain, but subject to what other panel members think.
I think either way would work, so I'm comfortable with that.
Thank you. So thank you to the administration. We have some amended wording there. I'll just give members at the gallery, the applicant, an opportunity to read and review that. Members satisfied with the wording that's proposed there? Yes, I'm seeing nods. All right, members, in that case, we do have a recommendation to grant consent. It is now subject to 4 reserved matters and the conditions and notes as were drafted. Is someone prepared to move that be, to move the recommendation? Yeah, Shree, you're moving, thank you. Is there a seconder? Yes, seconded Paul, thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that's carried unanimously. So, for the benefit of everyone who has joined us this evening, the application has received planning consent. It is subject to those reserved matters which need to be addressed. All conditions need to be complied with. Now, building consent and development approval will still be required before works can take place. Now, if you do have any questions in respect to the process from here, you are welcome to address those to the administration the next business day. They'll be happy to take your queries. We need to move to our next item for, we don't have any further items for assessment. We do have some items of other general business that we need to move to. Yes, thank you, and we will bring Misty back into the chamber. So you are welcome to remain in the gallery. You are welcome to leave at this point. Thank you very much for your attendance. We really appreciate your input. I might just ask, sorry, if there are any discussions that you would like to have, could you just have those outside, please? Thank you. Thank you. All right, members. Returning to our agenda, there are no applications for no persons to be heard. There are no applications for Category 1 consideration. Outstanding matters, appeals and deferred items. Adam, is there any appeal or deferred item that you would like to update us on? No. Okay, thank you. Is there any item of other business from the members? No. Is there any item of other business from the administration? No. Okay. Staff reports tonight and Neil, confidential matters and Neil. Is there any item of planning policy that any member would like to raise? No. All right, members. In that case, I am happy to declare our meeting closed at 8:37 p.m. I thank you for your attendance and deliberation on those complex items, and I also offer my thanks to the administration for all of your help and support and guidance. That's been very much appreciated while we work through those items this evening.